Hello, welcome. So good to have you here. And I hope that all is going well with you as we enter this next bit of the semester. And let's go ahead and get to it and get into some MLA documentation with nitpicking with style. I know you're so excited to get into MLA documentation style. I know it's everybody's favorite, and that's why I'm calling it nitpicking with style. So there's a style that by which and a standard by which we must prepare our papers and format our papers. And it is nitpicky, and it's not just me, but it's MLA, and we'll talk about that a little bit so that you can enjoy the nitpicking as well on your end. So here we go. So you might know of a few different documentation styles, and depending upon which discipline you're in or which division, different professors and different disciplines tend to format their papers differently. I know it makes it just a little bit more frustrating for us when we're students or even in English. Sometimes I had, going through my academic career, I had professors want me to use MLA style. I had others want me to use Terubien or Chicago style. And so it wasn't even uniform within English. At least here at SCC, we're all in the English department asking you to use MLA style. And some of the sciences have APA style, right? And even social and behavioral sciences. Chicago style, like I said, is used in some. But ultimately, these documentation styles were created for publications, especially scholarly works being published. And so it became a standard by which everybody could follow to know what was happening within a paper, from where the quotations originated, where to find the sources for the quotations. Also includes instruction for endnotes and footnotes, but we won't be doing that in this class. We'll be using the parenthetical references or in-text citation. I sort of jumped ahead and answered some of this question, why do we use it? Well, it's a standard for us all to reach in the sense that here's how it should look, and we're all going to reach it, and then there's an element of accomplishment in having done so. I already mentioned the publication purposes. It also provides us a really good opportunity to give credit where credit is due, to honor those we have used their intellectual property, their thoughts, their ideas, whether it was in direct quotation format, summary, or paraphrase, which is another presentation that you'll be viewing soon. And it also helps us to be able to verify and access some of the sources. It's when you're conducting research for your research papers, look at sometimes it's called bibliographies or annotated bibliography. For MLA documentation, it's called a works cited list. Look at those documents and you can find sources that you might want to use in your own papers. So if you're reading an essay and there's a works cited list or an annotated bibliography for a quotation that you liked, then you can go access that original source and read it on your own and maybe incorporate something more from that source in your own paper. So it's nice to verify. It's also nice to access, and if we really liked an idea from one of the authors in something we read, then we can go read the original work. The other thing is it creates a community of writers, right? We get to commiserate over this. Like you, I've mentioned, I write my own papers still. I submit them for conferences and publication and presentation, and so I'll have my own works cited list, and I have to also follow MLA guidelines. and it's a pain in the tush for everybody. And so we can all talk about that and how it happens and what it's all about. So what technically is MLA? Well, it's the Modern Language Association, and it's developed by teachers and scholars. I'm not going to get so much into this. You can read what's on the screen in front of you. But ultimately, over 50 years ago, even longer now, a group of scholars got together to determine what sort of standards there are for paper format. They also helped to make punctuation and some of the grammar that we use more uniform. And many grammar handbooks that you might use all refer back to the MLA. But what is interesting is in the most recent edition, the 8th edition, which it's much briefer than other editions in the past, and this version came out in 2016, and the 7th edition was 2007. So you can see there's a great span of time between handbooks. But when this one came out, they took out some of the grammar stuff and some of the punctuation stuff. So I don't know if we just go back to the 7th or, but it was interesting. It's much more just about documentation. So we will be using, and we've already sort of been using, parenthetical documentation is the technical term for it. And this allows our reader to see which of our sources from our works cited list the quotation originates, and the page number or the paragraph number on which that quotation can be found within that source. And so you'll notice that I will go back and forth between calling this a parenthetical reference or an in-text citation. The reason I do that is because although many of the documents that I use in the MLA handbook call it parenthetical reference, other resources that you will consult will call it in-text citation, and I want you to know that the two things are the same thing. And so our in-text citation, our parenthetical references, are acknowledgments of another person's words, facts, ideas, their intellectual property, as I said earlier. And what you're also going to know is that the parenthetical reference in-text citation directly links to the works cited information. So typically we will have the author's last name and page number listed in the parenthetical reference, and that's from the specific location from which we borrowed this information. So what this is telling us in this second bullet point here with the Aschenputtle's stepmothers and the quotation here is that Grimm are the authors. It's Grimm brothers actually, but it's Grimm. And this quotation from this particular version of this story, which is the original Cinderella story, is on page 221. Now, here's where I want you to think about the nitpicking, because it changes at different times and different ways that you're incorporating quotations. So because the quotation itself was a question, that question goes inside the quotation marks. But because we are writing as an author a sentence here, the period comes after the parenthetical reference. The other thing I want you to notice is the only the only words or symbols that go inside a quotation mark are the actual words that you're quoting from another source. So we would never put the quotation mark after our parenthetical reference because we are including the parenthetical reference to signify to our reader where this idea came from. Only include what is actually being quoted within the quotation marks. So do not put the quotation mark out here. Oops. The other thing that I wanted to show you was this has 3 quotation marks. And the reason for that is because this is a quotation within a quotation. We'll talk about this again in the future, but I want to draw your attention to this. So if you're quoting something that already has quotation marks around it, like this bit of dialogue, then to signify that you are quoting a quotation, you will put double quotations on the outside and then single quotations on the inside. So ultimately you'll have 3 quotation marks. And that's essentially what this is about. Please also remember that typically we will put just 2 quotation marks, and the only time we ever use single quotation marks. So even when you're just sort of using air quotes, it's always double quotation marks. The only time we use single quotation marks is when we have a quotation within a quotation, as in this example there. So what happens if we don't know the author's name or have no page number? Sometimes we get information from websites without named authors and listed pages. Well, first, we might want to rethink our sources because is it a credible, authoritative, scholarly source? But sometimes, as in the example in this 3rd bullet point, you'll see that it might be a definition from a website. And so what would happen is the little bolded title above this area that you're quoting from, instead of an author name, you would put that title, that bolded title, just the first word of that bolded title in quotation marks, as in the example here. Then in your works cited list, the first word of that citation would be fresco, like as it's written here, but the entire title with a period and then the website information following that. So if you've already named an author's name within the paragraph, the body of your text, do you need to name the author again in your parenthetical reference? The answer is no. So as you can see here, one possible way to lead into your quotation, according to James Talmage, an accomplished historian and clergyman, a parable is, so you can name the author, give a teeny bit of information about the credibility of that author, and then present the quotation. And then instead of including the last name and the page number in the parenthetical reference, all you need to include is the page number. Now, how about when we use a quotation other than dialogue, as in the example of Ashen Petal in the previous slide? But in this instance, if you are, so this 3rd bullet point, so Hanafi is the actual article that we had, and it was a newspaper article is where this quotation came from. And in Hanafi was the author, and that's the document we had. In that article, Hanafi quoted Greyerhall's, and the quote that we liked was the Greyerhall's quote. So we want to use the Greyerhall's quote, but we didn't get that directly from Greyerhall's, and or we didn't read the original work, the primary source where Greyerhall's says whatever Greyerhall's says. You can read that here. So what we would do is in our parenthetical reference, so notice, first, we wouldn't say Hanafi says this because it was Greyerhall, Hanafi quoting Greyerhall's. So we would go ahead and still name Greyerhall's. And then we have our 3 quotation marks, our double and then our single. And just so you know, I have to just put a space between the double, then do the single, and then delete the space. Otherwise, the quotation mark faces the wrong way. You don't have to do that when you get to these last, the closing quotation marks. But if you have a more sophisticated way of doing that, let me know. But that's how I manage Microsoft Word. So then this is the quotation that Greyerhall said. That's what this initial quotation mark says. And then the double is that we're quoting it from here. And this QTD is lowercase, period. That means quoted in Hanafi. So that's how you work a quote within a quote. Or quoted information within a source. So if in one paragraph we're going to just be using a few quotations from a single author, do we have to keep repeating the author's last name? Technically, no. So you can read through this paragraph, and what you're seeing here is the politically correct Cinderella is a very fascinating piece of satire that I encourage you to read if you'd like. And you can see that there are this word is quoted from that piece, and we said Garner is the author, and this is found on page 235. And then this is another quote also from Garner on 235. So because there's no other quotation from any author interrupting these two, you can just put the page number even though you didn't even say Garner's name. However, notice that by the time we get to this quotation mark, or this quotation, because we have introduced a new author, we have to go ahead and rename it. If we included another quotation from Garner after this quotation, we would have to either say Garner's name in the body of our text and then just put the page number in the parenthetical reference, or if we didn't say Garner's name, then we would have to include Garner's name and the page number right thereafter. We'll talk about these brackets more when we get to quotation use, but essentially, just real quickly, the brackets mean that as an author of my piece of writing, I have changed that direct quotation. I've augmented it in some way. And so the brackets tell you as a reader that everything else in those quotation marks are exactly as the original, but I've done something different. Either I've added something or I've changed something with those brackets. This is really important to acknowledge that we use block quotations when we are quoting 3 lines of poetry, 3 or more lines of poetry, or as we type within our body paragraph. If our quotation goes on to a 4th typewritten line, then we must make each of those types of quotations in a block quotation. I have another nitpicking notice for you, and what I'd like you to think about is how we punctuate the parenthetical reference a little differently with a block quotation than we do with an in-text or parenthetical reference. In-text citation or parenthetical reference. I hope that as you've been reading the quotations on every slide, that you've been noticing that there have been guides there's been a lead into the quotation, a presentation of the quotation, and then follow-up analysis or explanation for every quotation. That's a practice that you need to get into with your own writing as well. So what this says is in the paragraph, if this were written with the 1-inch margins, that this would also have been gone over 4 typewritten lines. So we make it a block, which is you typically for a paragraph indent, you do half of an inch or 1 tab. For a block quotation, you do a complete inch or indent an inch or 2 tabs. And then it's just 1 block. Oops, I keep doing that, sorry. And then notice here's the punctuation difference. There's no quotation marks because you've already indented, and that lets your reader know that this is a quotation. It's a longer quotation. And then you've got the period before the parenthetical reference. And then the parenthetical reference is sort of just chilling out by itself here. And then especially for longer quotations, you want to think about having twice as much analysis than your quotation. It's also useful to not have a bunch of really long block quotations, because most likely we aren't thoroughly analyzing all aspects of the quotation, and we can confuse our reader if we're asking our reader to go back to the quotation and figure out where our analysis relates to which part of the quotation. So it's better to break up longer quotations and analyze them as you go. But there are times where we don't want to interrupt it. So we must have a works cited list, and your works cited list does not count towards your minimum page range for your essay. This is in addition to. So if you need to write a minimum of 4 pages for an essay, then you should have a minimum of a 5th page with your works cited. But why do we need works cited lists? I've sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you're absolutely right. It's to help us and our readers find information, as well as to give credit where credit is due. And essentially, all our works cited list is an alphabetical list of the sources and the works that we used and actually quoted from or cited, included parenthetical references from, or summary with parenthetical references, or paraphrase with parenthetical references from the original work, so that everybody knows where some of our ideas and support and credibility comes from. So much like your essay, just your regular essay format, you have 1-inch margins around your entire essay. Similar to, you've got your heading order in the upper left-hand column of your first page of your essay. And then when you get to your works cited list, you just have the works cited. It just says works cited. It's centered at the top of the page, not in the header or footer. The only thing you ever have in your header and footer is your last name and the page number. And then you're going to begin every line, instead of indenting like we do for a paragraph, the first line of your works cited, your first citation in your works cited list, is flush up against that margin. There's no lettering, there's no numbering, there's no outlining. It's just an alphabetical order. You continue to just double space throughout. If your citation goes past the first line, the second line is indented a 1/2 inch, or in 1 tab, like a paragraph. And I've already talked about that. So you want to think about every element of your citation in the works cited list as a sentence or having a main idea. So you're going to have authorial information, the author's first and last name. You'll have title information. What's the title of the work? If it's an essay in a larger work, then what's the title and name of the larger work as well? What's the publisher and copyright information? What's the page range information? When we're doing online sources, our books online and journals online are similar to hard copies of books and journals and other sources, but you just include the URL, the Uniform Resource Locator address, with that. But this list here, if you have all of this information, then you're probably going to have a really good source. But if you're using websites, so to speak, so if given, you want to have an author's name, the title of the source, the work or material in quotation marks or italicized depending upon the type of work. You also need the title of the overall website or the host of the website, and that's usually italicized. We're nitpicking. When do we put quotation marks around titles? Smaller works. When do we italicize? Larger works. You can also think about, you italicize works that contain smaller works within them. They're like a container, right? Holding smaller works in them. Your monster book is a larger book edited by Andrew Hoffman that contains a number of smaller works within it. And so those smaller works are in quotation marks, unless it's an excerpt from a novel. And then you've got the larger work is the italicized work. So if there's a website name of the periodical or of the sponsoring organization, if it's a website, you need the volume number, issue number, other identifying number, number range or total numbers of pages, publisher, all this information. Now, if you have the URL, then you don't need to use the DOI, the digital object identifier. Sometimes the digital object identifier, some people like to prefer using that. But at the bare bones minimum, if you don't have access to all of this information and you're using an online website source, you want the title of the source of the section, like that fresco definition earlier, title of the website, and the URL or the DOI address. And here's an example. You'll also find more information about MLA, the MLA paper format, essay format, template, directions for MLA, and a full works cited example with an explanation of the types of sources in the writing resources module on Canvas. So notice centered, works cited. This would be 1-inch margins. Over here to the left, alphabetized by last name first, or first name if that's the only name for Beyonce, right? Then you've got, if you have more than one author, the first author, do it alphabetized. First author is last name, first name, and then first name, last name. Then periods after everything. Here's the title of the article, period. Here's the journal that it came from, comma, volume 1, comma, number 2, comma, the date it was posted, the page range. And then this is don't forget this is the search engine that we're using to access this information through our library database. It's the database, not search engine, I'm sorry, the database. And then it's EBSCOhost, and then here's the URL address so that someone could click on this and find this article. This is an example of what your works cited lists should look like for any sources you're using for Monster. So whoever the author is, then it should be the title of their work. This is the title of the book that we're using. It's edited by Andrew Hoffman, period, 2nd edition, comma, Bedford St. Martin's is the publisher, comma, the year it was published, and then the page range that this essay can be found on. In our parenthetical reference, we would just put Backstein and one of these page numbers. And then this is what it looks like if we're using a song from an album. And then here's another journal article with an example of a DOI. So go forth and be a nitpicker, and please don't confuse it with being a nose picker. Hope you enjoy this. Enjoy your nitpicking. It shows your attention to detail and the pride that you're taking in your work to make sure that you are following MLA guidelines correctly. It's easy to just look at what the form is and make your form follow it. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let me know. Have a good one.